Hello, Green Wave fans. It's Troy Dannen, Director of Athletics at Tulane University, and we're here for episode 6 of Wave Talk. You know, in this series, we've had a chance to talk to a lot of very impactful individuals, both internally and externally, that have a role in college athletics today. Today's guest is going to be particularly influential in this world of coronavirus, as our team physician, Dr. Greg Stewart, is my guest. Now, Greg has a lot of different titles. He's obviously a senior staff member of the Department of Orthopedics in the Tulane School of Medicine. He's co-founder of the Tulane Center for Sport. And last year, his probably favorite title became Tulane Hall of Famer. Greg has been a member of the athletic staff indirectly for 3 decades now, and to the point where he's caring for the sons and daughters of former athletes that he cared for back in time. I've known Greg. He was on the search committee when I was hired. I've known him the entire time, and I just, as we get into introducing Greg and starting to talk about this, I think it's important everyone know the role and the impact he's had in making Tulane athletics, putting Tulane athletics on the track that it is today. So, Greg, it's great to have you, and I look forward to the conversation we're going to have.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So my first question is going to be, and I don't know if the cameras will pan down eventually, but every time I've seen you in the last 5 years, you've worn cowboy boots. Now, I'm wearing cowboy boots today. There's got to be a story. I know you've got some Texas blood, but when you're in New Orleans, Louisiana, you may be the only cowboy boots I've seen. So tell me what the story is behind the cowboy boots first.
Well, I'm not sure that there is a story. I mean, it's growing up in Texas, boots for as long as I can remember. And so just have worn them all along. Of course, I didn't bring my favorite pair, my T-Wave boots, the old T-Wave that I wear on game days. But always boots. The only time you're not going to see me in boots is down on the field when I have the shoes that the Department of Athletics has given me to wear down on the field, and those actually get cycled into being the shoes that I wear when I work in the yard.
That's a great story. It's a great story. Everybody's always wanted to know, and they've always asked me why you wear the cowboy boots.
Yep.
You know, a lot of folks don't understand the role and relationship between the Department of Orthopedics, certainly the School of Medicine, the Tulane Hospital, and athletics. You know, we're very, very fortunate in how strong that relationship is. Could you maybe walk through a little bit of exactly how all those units kind of collide here to give the student athletes what we can give them?
Sure, and it's not an easy setup given the way that the university is put together. So we built Tulane Institute of Sports Medicine back in, I guess, 1997, 1998. So it's right here on campus. It's part of the hospital system, which is run by HCA, which is a professional hospital corporation. And they run the hospital in conjunction with the university. So it's a kind of a hybrid between the corporation and the university, and is staffed by physicians from the School of Medicine. So the sports medicine piece is all run through the Department of Orthopedics and Dr. Savoie, who's chairman of orthopedics. So that's how that piece runs. I came in with Dr. Mike Brunet, and back in when I started, and tell people that I was that snot-nosed resident that they couldn't get rid of, and here I am 30-something years later. So the School of Medicine, with the physicians that are there, provide the medical services for Tulane athletes. Where the nice thing about both the stadium and athletics department being where it is, and where Tulane Institute of Sports Medicine is that we're right there. So every morning, 6 o'clock, 6:30, I'm there, sick call for the athletes. They come over, whatever else we need to do, and then X-ray, MRI, all of the other services are right next door. And you know, a lot of stadiums and a lot of places have to bring someone in for X-ray for game day. We just unlock our doors.
So Tulane is also set up a little bit differently in that our sports medicine department really just doesn't report to athletics. In the beginning of the NCAA manual, one of the very first caveats is all medical decisions are made by the team physician, not made by the president, the athletic director, or the coach, but everything made by the team physician. And a year ago, all of the trainers that work for the athletic department were moved out of athletics and into TISM and under your leadership. Can you kind of explain, because it does play into what's going on right now with coronavirus, can you kind of explain why that's beneficial for the student athletes?
What it sets up is that the athletic trainers, the team physicians, and then ultimately I report up through Dr. Savoy and the dean of the School of Medicine, is that if we think that there is something that's in the best interest of the student athlete, I don't have to worry about coach coming and firing me, or you firing me, or firing the athletic trainers. They don't have that issue to worry about. And that's really the structure set up that way, because there have been some studies done where at other institutions, and we never had that problem here anyway, but from an NCAA standpoint, they set it up so that the athletic trainers, the sports medicine staff, didn't have to worry about undue influence from the coaches. And it gives us the opportunity to make decisions with regard to the health and safety of the student athletes solely based on their best interest. Not so much what is best for the team or what's best for the university, but what's best for the student athlete. So it's really nice in that it's set up in a way that gives us that autonomy to make those decisions.
One of the reasons I thought it would be most beneficial was ongoing training. You know, no one in athletics is really prepared to provide that training to the trainers. But, you know, working inside the medical system, and it's a tremendous advantage we have here at Tulane, is to have this medical system around us. What I didn't expect the training would focus on: how do we give PCR tests, and what have we turned our trainers into? They're no longer trainers. So let's walk back a little bit this summer. We shut down in March with coronavirus, and we talked occasionally about how would we ramp this thing back up. And when the decision was made in early May that we were going to ramp things back up starting in mid-June, you know, we really took that over. We could not have opened without you and without the work that the trainers did. So can you kind of walk through how their responsibilities changed in just getting us back in the door in June, and certainly up to the point where we're ready finally to play football?
So early on in all of this, as everything even was shutting down, we were trying to understand what was going on and have an understanding of the virus and what does it mean and what are we worried about and how do we test and how do we do all those things. And you and I have talked about it. I mean, we thought shutting down was hard. Opening up has been even more difficult with regard to just bring the student athletes back on campus. Fortunately for us, we've had your support, which has been huge, as well as up to the president and everyone else on campus from being able to do that. So the athletic trainers have kind of taken on the role of learning how to test, how to do the nasal swab, how to do the contact tracing, how to do all of the different things that are going on. We do the daily questionnaires as people are coming into athletics. They're doing the temperature checks. The fuel station, what was the fuel station is now the COVID-19 station, essentially. You come in the front of Wilson, we've locked down Hertz and Ullman and the Grill and Wilson in order to force everyone to come in through the front of Wilson. So they come in through the front of Wilson. They have to fill out their questionnaire as far as do they have any symptoms. They have their temperature taken. If that is all they need to do for the day, then they go through what used to be the fuel station to the right, and they go into the complex and now can go wherever they need to go. If it's their day to be tested, they go to the left, and the athletic trainers do the nasal swab. They can now do their own, but it's a supervised swab, and then they can then go and enter into the rest of the facility. So it has changed in so many different areas what we do and what the athletic trainers do.
So the good news, bad news for Doc is the testing regimen that Tulane developed, that really he developed for us, was the most aggressive in the country throughout the summer. Every student athlete, everyone who had daily contact with the student athletes tested twice since June each week. All the rest of us, even those who don't see a student athlete in the course of our days, tests once. We've tested over 4,500 times since the middle of June with, I think, 20 total positives, maybe 20 now total positives. So a remarkably successful 0.5%, if you will, positive rate. And we've really maintained that, and that's to the credit of the plan that Doc put together. But the plan was so good and so nationally regarded, and Doc's been cited in the media quite a little bit this summer, that the AAC brought him on as we put it together a medical advisory committee to decide how do we ramp back up football now, how do we play our sports again. And Doc, you were appointed, among your many other titles, chair of the American Athletic Conference Medical Advisory Committee, or as we like to say, the Associate Commissioner, because of all the number of calls you've been on. So can you walk us through a little bit, maybe not, I don't know, the details, or some of the details are interesting to our viewers, but the process in getting us prepared again to play football as a league?
It has been very difficult, and I'm not sure that the way that I became chair was real straightforward. And
you may have been nominated by a certain athletic director.
and it may have actually happened before I knew it was taking place. It kind of came through, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, by the way, the phone call that you're on tomorrow, you're going to be chair of this group. And so it prompted a few phone calls to be like, what am I walking into here? So the medical advisory group has a representative from each of the schools in the conference. So each institution is represented either by an athletic trainer or one of their team physicians. And we really just kind of started from scratch, because at the beginning, no one was really sharing, no one was talking to each other. The NCAA hadn't put out any guidelines at that point. We knew kind of what the CDC was doing. The Autonomy 5 conferences weren't putting anything out. So it was really kind of starting on our own to talk about return to competition. And so we made some assumptions. We started off with quoting the autonomy legislation from the NCAA so that the athletic directors and the presidents knew that we were making decisions based on the health and safety of the student athletes. So we weren't worried about the cost. We weren't worried about what the athletic directors or the presidents might come back and say. We wanted to make sure that we were doing right by the student athletes. So we made some assumptions that returning to campus, returning to practice, that each institution was going to manage that on their own. That really what we were going to do was when two American Athletic Conference teams came together, regardless of the sport. So that's kind of where we started with all of it. We started with spacing, extra 30 feet around the buses when they came in. Nobody would be in between the bus and the arena or the stadium as the team is coming off. Sidelines are expanded. Space around the sidelines is extended. So we started with those kinds of things that we were dealing with. Balls in the stands, just kind of trying to make sure that we could keep the student athletes safe. And then the testing, and the testing has just become its own thing. Right now the PCR test, which is the molecular testing that really is the best test that's out there, is what we do. The conference right now is expecting once a week testing for everybody, talking about twice a week testing. We're already there at Tulane, so we're already doing that piece. There's other testing, there's a rapid test that there's some discussion about doing. The problem is that federal government and a lot of this is taking those testing machines and equipment and supplies in order to do what they need to do across the country. So a lot of the schools, you hear it in the Autonomy 5, we're not even sure they all have the equipment that they're talking about. So testing becomes a big thing. And then the whole issue of masking and social distancing, and then the contact tracing, which is the other thing that becomes very difficult. CDC comes out and talks about less than 6 feet for more than 15 minutes or some sort of face-to-face contact. But nobody CDC, the NCAA, the Autonomy 5, no one has really sat down to talk about what does contact tracing look like in sport. So we don't know volleyball, does a cross the net count in football? If you come and tackle someone from behind, does that count? Does the offensive and defensive lineman hitting face to face, does that count? So there's a lot of subtleties that are going on that are very difficult to kind of sort through. And that doesn't even take us to a Friday morning when we've got to sit down and decide whether or not two teams that are going to play football on a Saturday are negative in their testing. The communities are capable of managing COVID and allowing the game to proceed.
So, in a lot of ways, I think what I see is everybody wants very objective answers. If X is true, then Y happens. If Y is true, then Z happens. But it seems like this is going to be the most subjective experiment. And I say experiment because we don't know. We talk about the unknowns, and we could touch on the myocarditis because that's such in the public domain of discussion so much. But all of the unknowns from a health standpoint, it does feel like we're fairly confident that the health and safety of the student athletes, the coaches, the staff, everybody on the field on game day can be maintained through the playing of football. It's one of those things we do to make sure that that's the case. Everything leading up to, from a testing standpoint, to the contact tracing. But again, I think everyone should expect, and I'm expecting it to be very subjective. And going back to what we said at the very beginning, the doctors have the authority here. So the subjectivity is not what I want. It's not what the city wants. It's not what the coach wants. It's what the doctor determines is safe for the student athletes.
And it's very fluid. So not only do we have changes in testing and changes in all sorts of other things that are going on in the science that's coming out on a daily basis, but as we start talking about this and we're talking about events, then, is 5 positives on a football team too many to play? Well, if it's a volleyball team, 5 is too many, so you can't play. 5 on a football team, if it's 5 of your quarterbacks, then you can't play because it's not going to be safe. But if it is, walk on someone that's probably not liable to play, if you've got some of the other positions and you've got first and second string that are still okay and they're not contact traced, then you may be fine. You may still be able to play with 5 or 6 positives, depending upon who and positions and all those other kinds of things. The other thing so if we're going to Cincinnati, and Cincinnati's at a point where they're having a surge and their hospital bed capacity is low, such that having some sort of additional cases in the city puts a strain either on the university or on the city, then that game would be postponed as well. So it's more than just what's going on with the team or the coaches or the travel party as we defined it. So it's going to be a very subtle kind of subjective thing that we deal with.
I want to come back to the student athletes in a second, but I also want to separate what we're talking about from the health and safety and playing a football game from the question of whether there should be fans in the stands. The fans in the stands question, and correct me if I'm wrong, is really more of a city by city, county by county decision based on their own local health guidelines. So the decision not to have fans in the stands, at least for our first game, is not a medical decision that's coming from the doc. It's not an administrative decision that's coming from the campus. It's really the limitations of in here, Orleans Parish. The Saints won't have anybody for their first game either. But so the health and safety, we're not saying having fans is going to compromise the health and safety of the players in the field. That's where the city guidelines and municipality guidelines are kicking in.
Absolutely. And, I tell people all the time that my role is down on the field, down on the court. If it's going on up in the stands, I'm not as concerned about that and what's taking place. And, a lot of people sit around, they look at the stadium, and they think, what do you mean you can't have 20% or 25% in there? But what people are missing is that it's not the social distancing in the stands, it's actually getting in and getting out of the stadium. So, the entrance and the exits are narrow, so people normally are very close to each other, bumping into each other during that. That's where a lot of the issues are. It's not once you get into the stands, it's the line for the bathroom, the line for the concessions, getting in and out, the buses to and from the stadium. So those are really the issues at that level as opposed to the capacity of the stadium.
One of the things, getting back to the student athletes, one of the things I think has set Tulane apart in this process, and you've been central to this, is the communication with the student athletes. I know in a lot of places that hasn't happened. There's enough uncertainty right now without them being uncertain about, one, what are we doing to protect them, and secondly, just an ongoing dialogue with them. Tell me a little bit about, I know it's important, but tell me why, the things we saw from some of the groups trying to organize student athletes in other leagues, and even maybe we saw that a little bit in our league. Tell me about how important that communication has been with the student athletes and their families, and maybe how it's helped get us to the point where we have 4,500 tests and 20 positives.
I think it has been absolutely critical, and not just because we're on this, but your leadership in allowing this to happen, I think has really put us ahead of certainly everyone in the conference and maybe in the country. The student athletes, as I've talked to them and have said to you and the commissioner and several others, I don't think they want a seat at the table while we're making these decisions about PCR and POC and all the other kinds of things. They just want to know that we're thinking about them and that their health and safety is at the front of our minds. So I think being able to sit down and talk with them has here afforded them that luxury of being like, okay, they are thinking about us. They are taking these things into consideration, because we did on all of these. We talked about the extra spacing. We talked about the testing. We talked about what was going on and answered whatever questions they had. And honest, if we didn't know the answer, we said, we don't know the answer. And sometimes they would come up with questions and we go, oh, that's a really good question. We're going to have to think about that. And I think that's all they wanted to see is everyone talks about honesty and transparency, but that's really what it was about. I think our student athletes, and there have been some other conversations that I've had with other student athletes across the conference, once we finished that conversation with them about what we were doing and how we were doing it, they're fine. They sit back and go, oh, okay, good. They've got it under control. And at the conference level, the concern was, are all of the schools going to be doing the same thing as we get into competition? But here, I think having the parents be able to hear what we're doing and ask questions, the student athletes to hear what we were doing and be able to ask questions, I think has really made all the difference in the world. Because when you go and look at some of those documents that the student athletes have put out across the country, the theme is that they don't know, and they've just been kept in the dark, and they're not aware of what their school is doing to protect them. And we were very upfront with that from before they came back on campus and walked them through returning to campus, returning to practice, and even what a game day would look like with some of the extra stuff that we're doing. So we were real upfront with them, and I think that has made all the difference in the world with our student athletes and their families.
I'm asked a lot about, how do you have 0.5% positive rate? And I think it goes back to that communication, because everybody bought in. Before they got here, they bought into what was going to happen, why it needed to happen. And so by the time they came to campus, they were ready. And I think great credit to the student athletes, because we're asking them to not live like college students right now. We talk about a bubble a lot. This is really not a bubble.
No.
3 hours a day when we're tied up with football or whatever sport, then it feels like a bubble. But that protection doesn't last the other 21. It's really about the commitment they're making, and I think has really shown up.
And we talked to them about that. That was one of the things that we were very clear with them, is that, whether this was successful ultimately was on them. That they were going to make sacrifices, and we appreciated and understood the sacrifices they were going to be asked to make in order to be able to compete. And those are going to be same kinds of things with social distancing and masking and hand washing, but really staying away from some of the college events that they might otherwise participate in, that they now can't do that. Because what we saw at other campuses was that it was the beach or the bar or the party that brought the virus into athletics. And so we were really talking to them about staying away from large gatherings and their families staying away from large gatherings, and they bought into it. And even with that positivity rate that you were talking about, most of that is people showing up positive. Probably out of 22 individuals that were positive, probably 3 of them have happened once we've been back here on campus. The vast majority have come that way. And then we found them before they even came in. So we test them. They don't come into athletics until those results come back, and then we allow them in. If they're positive, they don't come in.
I wake up every day checking my phone to see if something happened overnight that may mean football doesn't play this fall. It seems as if we've accepted and understand the health-related risks of football, and that they're mitigated to the point where physicians believe it's safe. Let's talk maybe in closing about some of those things we should be watching for that might impact the ability to play football that isn't necessarily related to the blocking and tackling, the health and safety of the players, but what I would say are the much more subjective things that are happening on campuses, the contact tracing, or maybe it's the unknown of what is the unknown. What's on your radar screen?
You know, at this point, I feel like we've done a pretty good job of lowering the risk to the level that we can. And I think that everybody is comfortable with where we are. Are we going to have games across the country that end up getting canceled, postponed? Yes. We're going to be closer to Major League Baseball than NBA. And you saw what happened in Major League Baseball. So I think it's going to happen. We've got to do everything we can. As we've seen across the country with campuses closing, I think that's going to be the thing that's most concerning. As we sit here today, we're still kind of within that first 2 weeks of individuals coming back to campus here at Tulane as well as other places. I can tell you that not only have we led the country in athletics, but also at the university level. So I know that President Fitz is doing things more so than any other institution across the country. So I think very likely Tulane will be able to play. The question is going to be, are we going to have competitors to go up against?
You know, we've told the student athletes, and Doc and I have been not only on the Zooms but face to face with them at least once or twice since they've come back, and so there's 3 reasons we won't play at this point. One is if you tell us you don't want to play, and we actually did survey the student athletes here, and one of the few schools in the country that did that, to say, hey, look, you don't have to play. Do you want to play? Which our student athletes did. Secondly, is there's going to be some health-related issue, those unknown unknowns that will arise that say, nah, we can't continue to play. And that's, I think we look for that every day, but it hasn't arisen at this point. But the third reason is there's nobody left to play. And that's not as simple as the league shuts down and we're the only one left standing. That is the institutions that are going online only and maybe decide they can't play. That's the other leagues that shut down. I feel that if more leagues shut down, I think it becomes very vulnerable for all of us. Because it's not just is there anybody left to play, but we're not going to be the last team standing. We're not going to be the last league standing. So those are the 3 reasons, and thankfully up to today, we're still good. The players want to play. The health risks have been mitigated, and the other schools are committed to continue to play. But Doc, we wouldn't be here certainly without you. Your leadership in the league is I would say is given the league a chance. I'm not sure that we would have had without your leadership. Certainly what we've done on campus, this is something that Tulane can hold up and say we are the standard bearer, both in what we did and certainly the results of what we've done. And again, that was your leadership. But, the last thing I'll say to you, and, we joke a lot and we have a lot of fun with each other. But I mean, 3 decades of this, there's a reason you're in the Hall of Fame. 3 decades of this commitment to the student athletes is remarkable, and we appreciate it, and appreciate you joining us on Wave Talk just to kind of walk through how we got to the point that we got to, and I couldn't be prouder where we're at, and really, really appreciate your leadership in getting us here.
Thanks. I certainly appreciate being here. I can hardly wait for the cameras to go off because you've probably now said all the nice things that you're going to say about me for at least the next 5 years.
I thought I'd said them all when we inducted you into the Hall of Fame last year, but, new information. I needed to quote new information. So that's a wrap for episode 6 of Wave Talk. I appreciate everyone following us today and listening to Doc and understanding maybe from a health and safety standpoint how we've gotten to the place we've gotten and where we're at as we head into, hopefully, a football season this fall.